somebody back there. I call this meeting of the Northeast Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The board will now adjourn into executive session pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meetings Act. Texas Government Code, Section 551.074, to discuss personnel or to hear complaints against personnel, and the time is 5:30.
It's like a Tigers day game.
The board will now reconvene into open session and the time is 5:46. Item 4, matters from executive session. A, personnel including but not limited to administrative appointments pursuant to Government Code Section 551.074, 1, possible action regarding routine personnel including but not limited to administrative appointments. A, principal of Legacy of Educational Excellence High School. Do I have a motion to approve as discussed in executive session?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Villarreal. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Item B, principal of Bradley Middle School. Do I have a motion to approve as discussed in executive session?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Item C, principal of Harris Middle School. Do I have a motion to approve as discussed in executive session?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Villarreal. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Item 5, presentation A, Internal Audit Department Quarterly Board Update. Ms. Shoesmith.
Good evening, President Gronin, board members, executive staff, and guests. Tonight I present to you my quarterly update with the audit work that my team and I have completed since my last update, which occurred on February 27th. Since our last meeting, my team and I have completed 3 additional audits, multiple unannounced cash counts at various campuses, as well as continuous monitoring of the internal audit hotline. I provided each of you with a list of the completed audits up for discussion this evening, and as well provided the audit reports in the first week of May. Y'all would have received a bunch of them right in a row. We happened to finish a bunch all at one time, so. For the audits up for discussion this evening, I believe we can discuss them in open session pretty thoroughly. As we have in the past, if any, specific questions come up, I'm happy to handle those as well, so. Would you like to just ask me questions about them, or would you want me to give you a little summary of each in lieu of time? I don't know. I'm happy to do either.
I read all of them, so I think we could just ask if there
Sure.
were questions about them, unless y'all would like her to do a summary. Okay. Does anybody have
Yeah.
questions about?
Let's just start with the first one, the
sure.
conflict of interest review.
That'd be great.
Any questions?
Any questions about the conflict of interest?
How many did that go out to?
5,297.
And we had it was a 90.
Close to 92%.
92%? Okay.
Yes.
Which seem higher than in the past.
Yes, it was
Okay.
70 last time.
Yeah, so good job.
Oh, thanks. I really worked diligently over a good 6-week time frame preparing. I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 different communications in various ways, sending out emails. I presented at the principals meeting and got the principals buy-in to please help me with your staff and explain the importance of the survey. Aubrey, your team was amazing. Ms. Chancellor and her team were integral, and they prepared a lot of PR for me to put out there. Internal audit doesn't usually, it's not the most popular subject a lot of the time, so we haven't done that before, but we were in the employee newsletter, gave a heads up there. Dr. Micah was kind enough to mention us in his weekly employee message. I mean, I really did try to hit all the facets. And I saw a good lift in the initial response from employees within like the first 2 weeks of the survey. Compared to last year, we hit about 78% of employees very quickly. And then kind of plateaued and stalled, to be honest with you, and I had to get creative. I extended the time frame a little bit, worked with planning and performance, and had to do some manual work. I'm going to make some changes next year. I learned a lot as far as our technology goes and how people's email block Qualtrics surveys. So I probably did 400 surveys manually through email with people, just trying to get them to answer the survey. So, but we got to a good amount. I think I did everything that I could. So
Good.
with no When it's all said and done, the whole point of it, of course, is to determine if we have any employees that are currently in a situation where there is a conflict of interest. And, I researched those, and when it all came down to it, there's nothing active currently right now. Those that have potential, there's always going to be that, and they filed their documents as they should, and so it was a good review.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anybody have questions about that one? Okay, we're going to go to the next one.
Next one was Driscoll Middle School. Just a traditional campus audit for them.
Can you explain kind of briefly about the whole concessions?
Sure.
I can't think of the word all of a sudden, but just how they account for the concessions, and it sounds like that's getting cleared up between
Sure.
the different parties involved with all that, for all campuses. But if
Most
you could just
definitely.
give a
It's-
quick summary of that.
Essentially what, one of the things that we look at a campus audit, really, to be honest, in our secondary schools, our elementary schools do very minimal fundraisers, pretty much just the fun run and, a couple things like that. But in our middle and high schools, they do quite a bit of fundraisers, obviously high school, for sure. And one of the reviews that internal audit does is we look at the fundraiser in its totality, a handful of them, a sampling of them. And that would be the planning of the fundraiser, the pricing, making sure they're accounting for sales tax. It's like a little business that they're running, essentially, when they're doing a fundraiser. And then we account for the deposits coming in as they're selling something. And then when it's all said and done, them paying the invoice, so the check that goes out. And then the whole point of a fundraiser is they should make a profit. That's why they're doing it. So there's a reconciliation at the end to ensure that they did indeed make a profit. You'd be surprised how many times they don't. So they're kind of spinning their wheels for nothing. Specifically in this instance, or let me back up and say, there is a form that was developed from Budget and Finance Department that asks the campuses to utilize this form to do all of this tracking. It is used sporadically, dependent on the campus. Some are very good about it, some are not so good. And this specific instance, there was a question regarding when to use it, and the campus felt like, or was told in some communications, that running their concession stands, just a basic concession stand, I guess at a basketball game or something on campus, they didn't have to account for it as a fundraiser. And so it's kind of just a difference of opinion maybe as far as the definition of a fundraiser. So we work together with Budget and Finance to get further clarification on that. Every year they update their SAFCAF manual with things that come up throughout the year, and they're going to beef up that verbiage a little bit in that section regarding fundraisers, specifically to give a couple of examples of what are fundraisers. This is not a fundraiser, just to give some clarification in writing. So yeah, does that help answer? Sure.
Any other questions about that one?
Oh, and I will say on the fundraiser part, I know Susie and I are excited. That form is going to go away sooner than later. We've been working with MIS to pilot a new app that will be utilized by the campuses. We've done our piloting, and the campuses are doing that now, a handful of them. So our hope is it goes live in the fall. It'll be much more user-friendly and modern for them to utilize. So it's coming soon. We're been working on a fix for that. So
Good. Okay, how about the next one?
last one is CRMS, our inventory, major inventory for our controlled resources and our capital assets. Questions there?
Any?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if am I allowed to, may I ask you a question before I ask this question in open session? Is that okay?
You want to go back there? And
Yes,
ask me a question?
yeah, because I just need to know if it's okay for me to ask this question out here.
Okay. I hope I have the answer.
You have the answer to everything. I know you do.
We will adjourn into executive session to ask that question.
Yes, ma'am.
So if there are any other questions regarding this, to be out and open. And then, do you want to go ahead and maybe go through all this, and then we'll just
Sure.
go back there if there's any other?
Most definitely, yeah. I
Okay.
think I can easily talk about the cash counts.
Okay.
From the last time that we met, my team and I completed 6 more cash counts. Some of them after holidays. We did a couple just normal midweek to see, what campus safes are looking like then. 2 high schools and 4 middle schools were in this last group of 6. So in total, we did 12 visits this year, which is about 20% of our campuses. We were able to do an unannounced cash count and get out there and have them see our face and keep top of mind. We might be stopping by. It really is one of those preventative things to ensure that they're keeping those cash levels down. They're getting things to the bank. That's the whole point. All 6 were, the safes contained the appropriate items. There wasn't anything wrong in that way. Just how I choose the campuses. Sometimes we look at their historical deposits, and if it takes them a while to deposit, they're holding on to money too long. We can look at those trends sometimes. So, target certain areas there. And we have a good conversation with the bookkeepers to find out what's going on and, why is, do you need some help or, those type of things. And it turns out a handful of the folks, unfortunately, had been through, one had a car accident, had been on medical leave. Like they were just out. I mean, that was what was causing the delays. But in general, they were great and good results all year long. Nothing huge, scary, wrong. Just some few things that could easily be tweaked. And I think word's starting to spread a little bit. So hopefully it'll continue. So we finished those. Okay. And then the last thing is hotline. We had 4 more since we last met. I'm happy since we're going to go back there. If you want me to give you a little blurb, I can. There's 3 of them were actionable. I can talk about those. And then you want me to do work in progress as well before we go?
Sure.
So we're finishing up our audit plan for the year. Currently working on a security camera audit that is falling under me. I'm the lead auditor on that. I'm happy to say we were able to we'll complete our audit plan in time for me to add 1 more campus in there. There's always the hope to be able to do that. So one of my auditors is working on a elementary school campus. And then our summer warehouse, the inventories of our warehouses is coming up this week. They're starting this week. So those the final push to the end of our audit plan. And then comes full circle, make a plan for next year and keep on going. So we'll do those confirmation letters. Y'all will be receiving those soon, kind of your conflict of interest letter that you receive. And then I'll be back in August to present that new year to you.
Okay, great. All right, so we're going to item 6, adjourn into executive session. The time is 5:59 for 1, personnel pursuant to Government Code Section 551.074, 1, discussion regarding specific personnel related to Internal Audit Department quarterly report. The board will now reconvene into open session, and the time is 6:17. Item 8, new business for possible board action. A, Board Policy 1, discussion and review of Board Policy BBE and possible action regarding pending requests for reports presentations. Dr. Micah.
Thank you, Madam President. So I wanted to come back to the board and review something. So back, I don't know, several years ago, I had reviewed some policies with you all, and we had gone through them and looked. And I happened to be talking with a superintendent who's relatively new about how to handle something, and so I revisited this policy, and I want to share with you all, and then I'll get to where it's going. So, in Texas Education Code 11.051, it's A-1. It says, unless authorized by the board, a member of the board may not individually act on behalf of the board. The Board of Trustees may act only by majority vote of the members present at a regular meeting. So that comes from your board policy, BBE. And so what it states in here is it says, request for reports. No individual board member shall direct or require district employees to prepare, now, just so you know, district employees also is me, all right? To prepare reports derived from an analysis of information in existing district records or to create a new record compiled from information in existing records. Directives to the superintendent or other custodian of records regarding the preparation of reports shall be by board action. So I bring this up because what we've been doing, and I just kind of want to go back to making sure that we're following the law and the policy, is at the end of board meetings, we're getting to, does anybody have reports or anything that they want to do? And you guys are talking about it, but you're not voting on it. And so anything that you are wanting, so look, first of all, as a board member, any record or any document that we possess, being the school district, you have an inherent right of access to it. All right? It's similar to open records. If we have it, we're a public entity, unless somehow it's blocked by the law, we're going to provide it to you. But once you go and ask for a report of something that I do not possess, the only way to get that is by a board vote. All right? So something, and so I'm not here tonight to call people out, but I listed it, and I worked with Mrs. Grona because I want to make certain that we're doing it the proper way. So, you know, Ms. Villarreal, you had asked for a presentation regarding how we dispose of vape pens and oils, right? Okay, so that came to me, but really, since that's something we have to create, it needs to be acted on by the board, all right? So the reason I say that, and there are some other requests that have come in, and unfortunately those members aren't here tonight, but what this board just needs to do is Ms. Villarreal just needs to say, I would like a presentation on how to dispose of vape oils and pens. You guys, as a board, then can say, you know, whatever you want to discuss. And then if you vote, and as long as 4 of you say absolutely, then we're going to bring you a presentation about it. But again, so I guess moving forward, what I would encourage you all to do when you come with a report or some kind of request, I think probably the best would be, is that in your possession? So do you currently have a document that would answer that question? Then I would be able to say, or I could look at one of my staff and say, do we possess something like that? They're going to either say yes, no, or we're going to check. If we say, yeah, we have that, then there's no action required. Does that make sense?
So it's only if you have to create.
It is only if we're having to create something, because I started reading into this and then I met with our legal counsel just to make sure that I understood it. But once it is the creation of anything new, then the board has to act upon it. Now, that's not to say I want to put something on an agenda. You can, two members can do that. That's fine. You as the board have the procedure to do it. It's when you need something from the school district through me that I need to have my people create or we need to do, that's where the vote has to come in.
Yeah, and I think I know we had pretty lengthy discussion about that last year, sometime in the last year, and I think we interpreted our own policy to be more like when we're gonna put things on an agenda, or if it's that kind of thing. So I appreciate the reminder, because
Yeah, and look, there for a while, y'all were doing this, and then I think
Correct.
we kind of drifted away a little bit from
We
it.
did.
And so I just want to make certain, because look, if we have it, you have an inherent right to it anyway. You don't have to ask for it here.
Sure.
But, I went and pulled BBE and read it, and then, because it references Texas Education Code 11.051 A1, I went and read it, and then because I'm not an attorney, I asked legal counsel to make sure that I'm interpreting it correctly. But when you read your policy, BBE local, it's pretty clear to say in there, this is how it is.
Makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So you just make a motion tonight for what you want,
We don't have that on the agenda tonight, though.
but no,
Well,
hold
it's
on,
part
it
of
is.
this
Oh, okay.
So I
discussion
listed
and
it this
review.
way,
Oh, I
so
see
I
what you're
wanted to
saying.
make
Okay.
certain that I included it to give you all an opportunity, based in that, to act. So it says, and possible action regarding pending requests for reports or presentations. So it is agendized, so Ms. Villarreal can make that request this
Okay. I
evening.
was thinking of our last
Yep.
item that's always on our agendas about board member requests.
No,
But what
but there's a
about-
pending one, so.
Okay, and how does this affect, because I know you have responded to, because you copy us on the emails, from when an individual board member requests reports by email, is that going to also?
So
Because I
again,
know you've
yep.
been putting in a lot of
Yeah.
time and work on those.
So Ms.
requests.
Huey, if it is something that is in our possession, I'm going to continue to fulfill it through that manner.
Through the email?
Correct.
Okay.
But if it's a report or a document or an analysis of taking, we possess, I don't know, some form, and it has a whole lot of information on it, and the request is, I would like an analysis of that broken up into this manner. That now we're creating. So that's going to take a board action.
Will that also require the TEA reporting that's already in place with the cost of these requests?
Not if it's acted upon
As a-
by the
as- okay.
board. Correct. That,
Okay.
that is only pertaining to requests, Ms. Huey, that are made of me for documents that we possess. That's that component of
Mm-hmm. Okay.
it. This is you as a board are wanting certain things. And again, none of you, and you guys know this, you got to vote. That's why we have meetings, and that's why you vote. That the body corporate has to ask for it. It can't be just a single member.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
That being said, I need to ask Ms. Grona a question before I proceed with asking for this information.
Okay.
Okay? May I?
Oh, sure.
Order that we have that, or is it just whoever says it, whatever? I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking through all of the conflicts to this. Red Sox Angels tonight? It's not. DJ? Tigers used to have a man struggle. So I think a lot of it is asking you if it's necessary. It's taking a while to get that information.
Okay, Ms. Villarreal?
Okay, at this time, I don't have any motions or anything to make.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments about this item?
Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you, yeah.
And again, y'all, please understand, I'm not, we always are trying to deliver what you want. There's just, it's right in policy, and we, it's just one of those reminders that we got to get back to. So what I'll try to do at report time is I'll start saying to you all, or somebody ask me, do we possess that? And that should begin your conversation.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, thank you. Item B, Business Services. 1, possible action regarding notice of public meeting to discuss budget and proposed tax rate. Mr. Villarreal.
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Mike, executive staff, and guests. Tonight, we ask for approval to be able to post or to put on a newspaper the notice of public meeting for June 19, 2023. It's something that we do every year at this time before we start, so we have to advertise.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about that? All right, do I have a motion to approve publication of the notice of public meeting to discuss budget and proposed tax rate in accordance with Texas Education Code, Section 44.004, setting the public meeting date as June 19th, 2023?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Villarreal. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Item 9, presentations. A, budget study session number 1. Mr. Villarreal.
Yes, Madam President. Tonight, we bring you budget study session number 1. The agenda for today is the schedule that we're going to be showing you. Budget adoption rules, legislative session update, general fund revenue basics, the state funding, property values, and M&O taxes, 22-23 revenue update, some benchmarking, and then talk about school nutrition services. So today, we'll talk about, like I said, the adoption rules, have a legislative update, revenue basics, school nutrition, and benchmarking. The 5th, in 2 weeks, we'll talk about campus staffing, additional allocation request, health insurance, compensation discussion, and debt service. The following week, final updates, additional compensation discussion, and then the detailed budget view with hopefully an adoption on Monday, June 19th of the tax rate, general fund, school nutrition fund, and debt service fund. The adoption rules, the district must adopt budget by June 30th. The board must adopt the general debt service and school nutrition services funds. The budget adoption must include a public meeting and a notice, which you all just approved. We do not adopt the tax rate at the same meeting as the budget. That will occur in August because we send it to TAA. They do the compression of the values, and they give us a tax rate that we're going to have to post. But the district receives the certified appraised values from the Bear Appraisal District. The Texas Education Agency provides the district its maximum compressed tax rate, and TAA sends notice certifying that the district has completed certain Chapter 49 filings, and that usually takes place in August or September. And with that, I turn it over to Susie Lackhorn, our Executive Director of Finance and Accounting.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. So we sent you some drafts of the slides Friday, and just so you know, the legislature was busy this weekend. So there are some changes, and so we're going to walk through them. Bear in mind that nothing is final until the governor signs the bills, and so there's still just a week left in the session, but it's still a long way to go. The first two bills that we're going to talk about relate to school safety, and there's one from the House and one from the Senate. They're pretty similar bills by this point in time. The House bill has made it pretty far, and the Senate bill's doing pretty well too, considering. You can see that they both require employees who interact with children regularly to get mental health first aid training. And then they also allow, require TEA to monitor school safety requirements. And then they authorize TEA to assign a conservator for a district that is non-compliance with those safety requirements. So they're taking safety very seriously, and if they find districts aren't doing the same, then they will appoint someone to manage the district to make sure that that happens. They also require school districts, during a transfer between districts, that they send the child's disciplinary record to the school that they're going to, and any threat assessment related to that child. Also requiring districts to submit to the Department of Public Safety and law enforcement agencies, first responders, maps of every campus and building. And one of the requirements is that if you issue bonds, that if you are not compliant with your school safety requirements, that when you spend the bonds, you can't spend it on anything other than school safety until you get that done. So once you're compliant, then you can do the other stuff that was in the bond, but up until then, you've got to spend your bond proceeds on getting compliant first. So you can tell they're making compliance with school safety a priority with these bills. The House bill raises the safety allotment from $9.72 per average daily attendance to $10. And then they provide $15,000 per campus for school safety. And then that amount per ADA will increase anytime the basic allotment increases. The Senate bill has a much larger amount. Instead of $9.72, it's $100. So we're talking about two similar bills, except for in the fact of the funding levels are very different. So for the House bill, the Senate has made edits to it. It's going back to the House for them to review those changes. The Senate Bill 11 is scheduled for the House floor tomorrow. And so, again, there's other things in these bills. We're looking about, if House Bill 3 were to pass, we would get about $1 million more in revenue for school safety. If Senate Bill 11 passes, then we'll see more like $6 million in revenue for school safety. So pretty big difference there money-wise, but a lot of the requirements are the same, and we'll just have to wait and see which bill wins and how it shakes out.
Can I ask you a quick question on the where it says requires districts to use bond proceeds to become compliant? How does that get around the issue of bonds were voted on for specific items by the voters?
It's a great question. I don't have the legal answer
nothing
for
against
that.
safety. I'm just saying if we haven't, but if a district had passed a bond that specifically lists A, B, C, D that they will do with that taxpayer money, how does this?
I think that's still to be determined. I think, Deb, do you have any insight,
That's I was
information?
trying to signal Miss Caldwell to see if she has any.
I know we have always been extremely responsible about that. I mean, besides the fact that it's a law, it's what our voters have said that they want, so.
So this would be future, nothing that is in the pipeline right now for a bond election. This would be, after this were to be implemented into law, we would receive rules on what would have to be required into that bond agreement with voters. And we would have to have, as we have as a school district, a safety item in the bond to ensure compliance with the rules. And as a reminder, the rules are not yet final. The commissioner has published them as tentative, waiting for the legislature to finish the work, so that we don't even have final safety rules yet. But this would be moving forward. There would be a line item for safety that's part of a future bond package. A district would not be able to build a new school and ignore safety. So we would receive rules on how to do that going forward.
Okay.
If you're not compliant.
Yeah, if you're not compliant.
If you're not, okay.
Yeah. And the bill has, on that second one, monitoring of those safety rules, implementation, and then the ability of TEA to assign a conservator if you are not being compliant with those safety rules.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Senate Bill 3 is headed to the Senate where they can concur with changes made by the House. It is property tax relief. And the House and the Senate are not in sync on how they think property tax relief should work. They both want to see, both of them in their budgets had planned for it, quite a bit of money for it. But both sides are not in complete agreement about how to accomplish it. So, but Senate Bill 3 provides an additional 15-cent tax rate compression. So we would see the M&O tax rates drop by 15 cents. It also increases the homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000. It originally had $70,000 in the bill, and then the House it's been revised up to $100,000. And then each year, if your value grows by more than 10%, it's capped, that growth, your taxable value is capped at that 10%. This bill would lower that cap from 10% to 5%. So it would really provide a lot of relief to homeowners. But again, they're pretty far apart, so we'll have to wait and see what compromise they can come between the two sides of the state. Senate Bill 9, this bill has passed the House Pub Ed Committee and is scheduled for House floor action tomorrow, and then it'll go back to the Senate. It requires duty calendars for certain professional staff, defines what the State Board of Educator Certification can sanction teachers who break their contracts, so it gives, in certain situations, if you have to move, then it's okay, and it provides exemptions and things like that. It establishes a grant to help pay for surcharges when you hire retired teachers, orders a teacher time study. It creates a residency partnership program, expands pre-K eligibility for children of classroom teachers, and it adds some funding to for pre-K. Defines, and this is in red because it's new, that adds funding is new. Defines requirements for student removal and return to class. So it provides teachers with a little bit more flexibility of when students for disruptive or unruly behavior can be removed. And then how they come back to class, they need to have a return to class plan approved by the teacher before those students can come back to the classroom. It increases the rates and adds a level to the teacher incentive allotment, which, as you know, we recently submitted our application for that, so that's exciting. It establishes a reimbursement for certification in certain areas, special education, bilingual education. And then this was, this last item, giving teachers a stipend or a one-time payment of $2,000 was in the bill when I sent it to you on Friday night. And now it is not in the bill any longer. So we'll see what happens. The additional funding for the pre-K would add us $400,000 to $500,000. We really have heard some rumors that things may change here. So they may add back some sort of teacher compensation in this bill. So just because this piece has been removed, I don't know that you can assume that nothing will come back, because the rumors are that something might come back in this bill. So when it goes to the floor, they can submit amendments, and it sounds like there are people getting ready to do that. All right, so Senate Bill 30 is the supplemental budget bill. It's in conference committee, and it's been this way for a while, but this is the bill that would provide $1.6 billion in grants to implement those school safety initiatives, to try to get everybody up to that standard that TEA is looking for. So we sent you this slide, House Bill 100. It had a lot of extra funding mechanisms for districts. And then, so House Bill 100 lives, it dies, it lives, it dies. And then this weekend, it got resuscitated, but it's different now. So the Senate had voted it out the Senate Public Education Committee voted it out today. But it looks very different than what I sent you on Friday. and it's gonna go to the Senate floor, and then it'll go back to the House for them to review the changes. It does increase the state's minimum salary schedule. We see a much smaller increase in the basic allotment. Previously, the bill added $140. This is only adding $50, so $61.60 to $62.10. It increases, back in 2019, when House Bill 3 was passed, it required anytime your basic allotment went up, that 30% of your increases be spent on compensation. This changes it to 50%, and instead of it applying to a broader group of employees, now it only applies to full-time classroom teachers only. So you'd have to take 50% of your increased revenue to provide raises, and it would only be for full-time classroom teachers only. They have some changes to the special education funding formula. They're really moving away from instructional settings to the intensity of service, and a lot of that's going to require rules written by TEA, so we'll have to see what those look like before we really comprehend the changes. Some increases to the funding rates for Comp Ed, so for our free and reduced students, we'll get a little bit extra funding. And then attached onto this school funding bill, the Senate added the Education Savings Account Program, or the voucher program. And so you probably heard reports that the governor previously said that the way the one voucher bill looked, it didn't have enough eligibility. He wasn't going to approve it. He was going to call a special session. If it didn't open, this bill actually makes anyone who was a prior year public education student or new to education eligible. If you were in private school, then you'd only be eligible if your household income was at or below 200% of the poverty line. Now, opening up eligibility like this, the state doesn't have it in the budget to pay for everybody who might want to take advantage of it. So then they have to prioritize. And so they would then give weights like these students go first. And then when we run out of money, we're out of money, and you don't get your voucher. So a lot is happening in this bill. I think we will see it go over to the House, and it looks very different than what they had sent to the Senate. So I don't think there's a lot of, they're still very far apart. So
And
I think.
Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, but the author of the bill would have to accept the changes, and we don't anticipate them accepting those, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sitting at the front.
Can I ask a question? And if you don't know the answer to it, it's just fine. But do you know what is 200% below the federal what that number is, or?
We have not, we actually saw this came out this morning. Ms. Caldwell sent it in the wee hours of the morning, so we haven't had time to
Okay,
digest everything.
That's fine.
But I don't think it would be, I mean, the federal poverty line's still pretty low. And so double that is still not, it's still not a lot. But if this bill continues on, we'll definitely have that number for you. But we're furiously searching to find the pieces that had come out. And some of these pieces were getting stuck in over the weekend, and you're having to compare the bills to see what changed. And so it'll definitely be interesting to see how what happens, because as Dr. Micah said, we don't think the author of the bill is going to accept these changes. So what happens then? You know, will we end up in a special session because nothing gets through? Because the clock is running down very quickly from this point on.
So to answer your question, Ms. Grona, according to Google, it is really based on the number of people in a family household. Mm-hmm. So if there's one, that number is 12,880. If there's two, it's 17,420. If there's three, it's 21,960. If it's four, it's 26,500. If it's five, it's 31,040, and so forth. So it just kind of keeps going up.
You know, in the big scheme of things, when you look at it, there's a pile of money that they're sitting on, and they were gonna parcel out some to public school districts and charter schools. And now they've reduced that to just $50, but there would be 8,000 that would go out potentially from the school district, because it'd be any public ed kids that can move over to a private school. So that would just be reducing what's available to divvy up to all the players. So they would be taking a big chunk of money that we might be able to use over here and sticking it over there. So I'm not sure there's going to be any traction in a special session. But if it goes to special session, we won't know what we potentially can get. So it kind of limits us, our abilities to be able to do anything.
And keep in mind, this drives a lot of uncertainty for us because when they call a special session, it doesn't have to be June. They could call it in July, they could call it in December. They have until the next legislative session starts to really call that. So it really could be some time before, if vouchers and school funding are tied together like it seems, and they get grouped together into a special session, then it really could be some time before we have an idea of what, if any, funding changes happen and how that impacts compensation and those kinds of things. And bear in mind with this education savings account, this would apply in 24-25. They can't get it up and running for 23-24. The comptroller's office has to build a system for an application. They're going to hire a vendor to come in and build a system for the applications and those kinds of things. And so they have to build that model.
And I'm sure that'll be
all
for
of it.
free, right? Yeah.
Sure.
I do appreciate you pointing that out, about they stuck in a voucher that almost to a person, with maybe one or two exceptions, I've not met anyone that wants a voucher. And in return, then decreased our allotment, thereby impacting 5.4 million children. And not only that, to not even consider taking care of our teachers. I got the notification of this at 11:30 last night and sat there and read what I could then, and then got on and watched the hearing this morning. And I was really stunned at the some of the committee members and their lack of knowledge of public education and what we do, what these incredible people do. It was very disheartening. They also very much limited testimony. Of course, if you put out something at 11:30 and call your meeting for 8:30, that doesn't give a lot of time for people to rush to Austin. But there were some wonderful speakers that were there for us. And they were very eloquent, and they were very, they did a great job. So I'm very grateful that at least a few people got to be there to fight for us. So
the next time we meet, the session will be over. It ends next week. So we'll at least know where we stand in relation to some of this. And then we should have a good feeling whether or not we think a special session will get called. So.
it's really challenging, though, to even do a budget when you don't even know.
Poor Susie.
I can't even imagine the hours that y'all are going to put in just with everything changing at 11:30 at night. It's just.
You know, the thing is, we get 6,160 per student, and they're willing to give 8,000
$8,000
for that same student to go to a private school, which kind of doesn't make sense, but.
I want to know if they're going to be held, if they're going to be getting this kind of money, are they going to require these teachers, to get out from underneath the Homeschool Act, which I believe that's where they are now, where they don't have to be certified. Anybody can pretty much go in there and teach. Are they going to be held to the same standards we are?
So in one of the bills, they had some of that accountability in there. It looks like a lot of that has been removed in this bill.
Oh, of course it's been removed. Why would they want to make any changes? They just want to gut our schools. That's all they're interested in doing. This is just a political stunt. Sorry, I apologize. I'm a little passionate about this.
So next time we meet, we'll talk more about where things stand, and we'll go from there. And as always, it's a challenge to adopt a budget in a legislative year because the turnaround's so short. When you don't have a school funding bill, you just adopt with what what the law currently stands and go from there. And so remember, we can always amend our budget. When these funding bills trigger compensation, then we will adopt a compensation plan that says contingent upon the passage of a funding bill, we will do what requires to be compliant with the funding bill. So you might end up adopting a budget based off of current law and a compensation plan with a bunch of what ifs. So won't be the first time, and probably won't be the last. So, but we'll update again next time. But we knew you're seeing a lot of headlines, and you're going to hear a lot of stories, and sometimes the rumors are, for the longest time, that $2,000 one-time payment sounded like a permanent raise, the way the words were and the news were covering it. And I ran around telling every teacher I knew, don't go spending that money, that's not going to keep going, it's a one-time payment. So we just want to be careful that, to separate the rumors from what's actually happening. And next week we'll have, not next week, but 2 weeks from now. Next week you'll be graduating seniors, yay. But 2 weeks from now, we'll know where the bulk of the session ended, and we'll know what it looks like for a special at that point in time. So more information to come. So let's talk revenue. As you well know, our property taxes make up the bulk of our funding, 80%, and state funding makes up another 8%. TRS on behalf also comes from the state, but they actually don't send us any money. They send that money straight to the teacher retirement system. We have other local revenue and federal revenue to round us off. But let's talk about how school funding works, how property taxes relate to that. I'm actually required to cover this concept every year, just so you know. I know that you've actually all heard this quite a few times, but I am still required to cover. So our revenue formulas are based on average daily attendance. If a student comes every single day of the year, we would be allocated $6,160. We get additional funds based off of if a student is economically disadvantaged or if they receive specialized services. These are just a handful. I'm actually going to show you more of the allotments coming up in a slide, but once you get all of those added up, that's our Tier 1 funding. There's also Tier 2 funding, and this is what's called enrichment funding. And the state will match your pennies for the first 8 pennies above your base tax rate. And I'll talk more about this in a couple of slides. So Tier 1, we take our average daily attendance, which is just a factor of our enrollment and our attendance rate, those instructional settings, and we add in property value to figure out how much the state's going to contribute. These instructional demographic settings can drive different buckets. So we've never really gotten down to this level before, but we feel like it's a good time to take a look at these allotments, especially with the legislative session, because you're hearing about some things happening. There was talk for a while about some of the allotments moving from average daily attendance to average enrollment. And so it helps to get a good feel of the pieces of money, the bulk of our funding, what all these little buckets are. So I know there's a lot of words on here, but let's just walk through it. So the regular program allotment is your average daily attendance times the 6160. And so we talk about that all the time. That's, as you can see, by far the bulk of our funding. So we were, for 21-22, that was about $308 million. Our projection for the current years is $299 million. And so a loss of $9.8 million. Again, we knew our enrollment's declining, therefore our ADA ultimately declines, and so we lose revenue there. Special education, on the other side, is actually growing. So our special education population continues to grow. I didn't include the weights because there's a ton of them, and so you get money based off of their individual service area. So it just depends. And so, but as you can see, our projection from 52.7 to 56.8 million. So a growth of 4.1 million.
So what projected ADA are we using?
So right now for 22-23, we are running pretty well in line with that 93.5. We're averaging right in line with that. So a little bit higher, 93.6, 93.5, and that's our attendance rate right now. All right, so for dyslexia, we get a little bit of money for them. It's a 0.1 weight, so it'll be the average daily attendance of the students that are receiving dyslexia services times 6160 times 0.1. And so this population is also growing. So we're projecting to go from 1.7 million to 1.9 million in funding for them. Compensatory education changes by tier. In 21-22, if you remember, we had a really high rate based off of us filling out forms for CEP instead of doing the actual meal application, the federal meal application. And now that we're back filling out the federal meal application, we have less participation. And so we see that actually going down for next year, for the current year from last year. Bilingual education is also growing. There's multiple tiers in here, and so it's either 0.05, 0.1, or 0.15, depending on which instructional setting you are receiving bilingual services. So that's growing from 7.1 to 7.5 million. Career and technology receives additional funding, and as you can see here, I didn't explain this on special education, but these special education and career and technology, their ADA is not included in the regular program. They get 1 plus their weight, and so you get the whole student in that allotment instead of being in the regular allotment and then a little extra. It's that student's moved all the way down into those allotments. So career and technology is weighted anywhere from 1.1 to 1.47, and we're staying fairly shrinking a little bit there, but staying fairly flat. Early education is for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. So it's that ADA times 6160 times 0.1. That all of these buckets have spending requirements. So we have to spend the money on particular things. Early education funding has to be spent on improving reading and math 3rd grade scores, and so performance. And so pre-K is included in there because the state feels that pre-K helps with 3rd grade reading. And so that's what that allotment is for, and it's a new one. It was added in 2019. The gifted and talented allotment is a 0.07 weight, but it's capped at 5% of your ADA. So it cannot exceed that number, even if you have a lot more students identified as gifted and talented in receiving services. And we are over the cap, and so our revenue is capped at 1.2 million. CCMR is based off of graduates and their kind of certifications and what they've done. We receive about $3.5 million for that. School safety, we talked about this earlier. It's $9.72 per ADA right now. Those bills would change it from either $10 or $100. And transportation is based off of a mile. So overall, our revenue forecast for 22-23, yes ma'am.
How are we going down per mile? How is this happening?
So again, I'm doing a projection for 22-23.
Okay.
And so later on tonight, I'm going to tell you how we've reduced some routes. And so that's a really rough guess. Please remember, these are projections. None of these numbers are set in stone yet.
This isn't something that the state's doing to us.
No,
Okay.
no, this is me being
This is
cautious
us.
in that we reduced some routes, and so I'm just saying mileage will be
Right.
maybe.
This is us becoming a little more efficient in transportation, i.e. Mr. Bill back there, figuring some stuff out, and we'll actually be talking about that in the balanced scorecard component of it. So hold that idea.
So anyway, so each of these have different spending requirements. Like special education, we have to spend 55% of that allotment on special education allowable costs. So each one has different allowable costs that you can spend the money on, and different weights or different requirements. So the dyslexia allotment, we have to spend every dollar servicing dyslexia students. Bilingual is 55%, but I can't code teacher salaries to, they don't apply to the spending requirement. So a lot of times you'll hear us talk about meeting those spending requirements and what's required and what's allowed. And sometimes we have to make changes to our staffing requirements so that things, because they'll change the rules on you, and so sometimes a certain type of staff will qualify, and then they'll change the rules, and those no longer qualify. So a lot of this will drive decisions and things throughout the district. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what these allotments were, because we always talk about Tier 1, and we always talk about the 6160, and then we say, and oh yeah, by the way, we get extra money for these instructional settings, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about what they are or how they're calculated. So we just wanted to take the time tonight to walk through and just build your knowledge of these different allotments. So, all right, so overall, we're expecting our total Tier 1 revenue to be about $13 million less than the year before. All right, so think about what Tier 1 is. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Okay, say it. All right, so Tier 1, once they calculate it, remember, so we do all those formulas, and
It's your cup.
there's my cup. So the state says, here's the total of your formula, and now we put in property taxes to fill the formula, to fill the funding requirement. And then the state says, oh, you don't have enough, so we're going to add a little bit more, and the state's going to contribute the difference. That is an oversimplified but basic understanding of how the formula and property taxes work together. So that's, then we have Tier 2, okay? So we talked about Tier 1, but now let's switch to Tier 2. Tier 2 is very different. It is similar in that it's got a lot of numbers flowing into the formula, but this is for enrichment, and they even call it the enrichment tier. When you adopt pennies above and beyond your base tax rate, the state is going to guarantee you a yield for those pennies. And that guaranteed yield is in law tied to the 96% wealthiest district. So whatever that district collects from a penny, the state makes sure you can get the same thing for that penny. So when you're like us, and we're not at the 96th wealthiest district, they'll end up giving us some matching funds to get us there. So we'll get to keep what we collect for that penny, and then they'll give us a little extra to get there. And so the state, throughout the state, it's all over the place how many pennies districts have adopted. So we have done 5. That is the most we can do without going to the voters to ask for more. Throughout the state, you can see anywhere from 0 to 17. Some districts went out to 17. The really high guaranteed yield is only on those first 8 pennies. After that, more recapture kicks in, and the yield's a lot lower. It's important to remember that anything over 5 voter approval is required. There was one point in time one of these bills working its way through the legislature was going to add the authority to add a penny. It's disappeared, but if you've heard about it, it was there for a while, and then it's been taken out. We don't know if we'll see it again or not. Anyway, so the state, make sure you get the same as them, and every district is different on what their penny is. I'll show you what the ones around us look like in a little while. All right, so let's talk about what the property tax timeline is, just in case. You probably get a lot of neighbors and people talking to you about their property taxes when their bills come in. My dentist used to do it every time, and I was already scared of the dentist, and then he was complaining about his property taxes at the same time, so it was kind of like a double scary moment for me. But during January through April, the appraisal districts will appraise properties, process exemptions. And just to remind people, whenever they get upset about their values jumping, we do not set the values. We have no role in it whatsoever. The appraisal district does that. In April through May, they start sending out their notifications of appraised values. Then you have until around May 15th to file a protest if you feel like your value is not reasonable. And through the months of May through July, the appraisal review boards or staff from the appraisal district will hear those protests and then either revalue the property or leave it as it is. At the end of July, the appraisal district has to have a certification. Enough values are set that they can certify their role. Then, once we get that, tax units will adopt tax rates in either August or September. So it's not just us, it's cities and counties, and then all those little ones too. They all have to adopt tax rates. October 1st, things hand off from the appraisal district and move over to the tax assessor collector. Those are two different entities. And the tax assessor collector will take the appraisal values and the adopted tax rates and send property owners their bill. And then they have until January 31st to actually issue payment without penalty. All right, so I'm going to show you our preliminary values, but bear in mind, these are really, really rough estimates. So at the end of April, the appraisal value sends us all the preliminary values. But bear in mind, homeowners, property owners have until May 15th to file their protests. So they're sending us preliminary values and still receiving protests at the same time. So in the last couple of years, we've seen quite a bit of property value growth, much more unusual growth than we had seen in years past. We used to be very consistent in our growth, like 3 to 5% for a long time. And the last 2 years have not been anywhere near that. But the appraisal district will work through all those protests, and they have to have either 95% of the values locked or 90% of the values locked with a solid estimate for the last 10%. Our appraisal board has been, appraisal district's been great about meeting that. And so even in such a hard year last year, they were able to get through all those protests and hit that 90 or 95% number that they needed to get to, which I thought was amazing given the number of protests that they had. So again, bear in mind that when we get to that number, it's really rough, and we will know, again, here we are, going to adopt a budget in June, but we won't know our property values until July. So, home values rose quite a bit. They rose 12.6%. 0.5% was new construction, and about 12.1% was increases in the value of existing homes. Commercial property also saw a significant increase, 18.7%. Again, 1.1 was the new construction, and 17.6% was the increase in existing property. Historically, we would see commercial values drop more. They hire lawyers and firms to help them protest, and so you often see their values drop quite a bit during their protest process. But again, we are kind of in uncharted territory with 2 years in a row of really high property values. The appraisal board always sends us a summary, and this year they're like, we're starting to see things kind of settle down. The market's finally slowing down. Interest rates have finally caught up with the housing market, and we're starting to see things slow, but it's still at least for January 1 values, it's still pretty significant. So our appraisal values grew, and our taxable value ends up growing about 10.6%. Now, I'm projecting 23-24 using what happened last year from preliminary values to certified values. It could end up very different because if they are more generous with protests or less generous with protests, more people may have learned lessons last year and are more successful this year in protests. We won't know. We're going to have to wait and see. But our frozen values are continuing to grow as our population, our homeowners are aging. And more people are hitting that over 65 and getting their values frozen. So net taxable value, roughly 11%. This would require, again, we have to, when our tax collections grow by more than 2.5%, we have to bring our tax rate down. That was part of HB 3 passed in 2019. So this is a continuous compression, bringing tax rate down so that our tax revenue doesn't grow overall by more than 2.5%. And so rough estimate would be going from 88 to 81 cents. And then taxes on frozen properties will grow as that group grows. Overall, having M&O taxes grow up by about 11.3 million. Right? But again, you can take these numbers will change every single day and ultimately end up could very swing in a lot of different ways in a lot of different spaces here. So we'll have certified values in July, and then they'll give us our tax rate, and so you'll know in August and September when we bring you the tax rate to adopt. TEA will tell us, we'll take the appraisal district certified values, we'll send it to TEA, and TEA will come back and say, here's your tax rate. And so there's not any room for us to change that other than going out for an election and adopting more pennies to collect that tier 2 revenue. But other than that, it's going to be what TEA tells us. All right, so here's the thing that is really important that I'm required to tell you every year. An increase in the tax levy of 11.3 million is not an increase to overall revenue. And I think you all know the reason is because when this part goes up on the cup, the state's part comes down, so they contribute less. So they offset their funding with to offset that to keep us within the size of the cup. So any increase in the levy requires a decrease in state aid. And now I've checked my box on my legally required statement. All right, so property values, just talking a little bit more. Single family homes make up about 60% of our properties. Commercials 23, multifamily residential 11, and all others 6%. We've stayed relatively stable. That single family homes from 58 to 62%. An interesting thing though, our average home market value before protest adjustments, so this number will change again once all those protests are done, increased from 325,000 to 365,000. So as you can see, our homeowners are definitely seeing increasing values. When you chart market value in the orange, taxable value in and our levy, you can see that market value is just skyrocketing there in the last 2 years, and that's what we've seen. And then the tax rate, taxable values coming down for increased homestead exemptions and those kinds of things. There's a lot of compression in 07, 08, and in 14, 15 as the state tried purposely to lower tax rates. They increased the homestead exemption in 15, 16 from 15 to 25,000, and then they just recently last year increased it from 15 to 40, and now we might see another increase. So let's move on beyond property taxes and let's talk about attendance. We talked just a little bit ago. The dark blue line is the current year, and so good news, it looks better than last year. We don't have that big dip like we had in the 4-6 weeks of last year. That was last January. And we're not back up to our previous levels, but our trend line's starting to look more like it. And we were hopeful that we would run in that 93.5% range, and we were doing it. So this is good to see a improvement over last year, and hopefully we'll continue that trend. Enrollment, we've known for quite some time that we've been declining enrollment, so next year we are projecting another loss. We peaked in 13-14 at 68,000 students, and we've definitely been seeing the declines, the big steep decline back from early in 1920, and have continued to do so. So we're continuing that trend into our projections for next year. Moving on to benchmarking, just to give a feel for revenue around us, because this is really kind of setting the stage to understand that compensation is different at every district and revenue is different at every district. And even though we're all funded off the same formula, there are lots of factors in there, especially when you're talking about the number of Tier 2 pennies that have been adopted. We are not quite middle of the road when it comes to general fund revenue per ADA. This is the last complete year that we have access to. Alamo Heights must have gotten quite a few big rebates on their property taxes or something, because their number is quite unusual for them. But as you can see, a lot of the districts sit a little higher, and some of that's the makeup of their students, and some of that is the number of pennies that they've adopted. When we look at those pennies above compressed rate, so these are the ones, the enrichment pennies, you can see a lot of us are sitting at 5 pennies. And then you can see the districts there that have gone ahead and have adopted above that. A lot of times,
Susie, can you
yes.
go back one
Sure,
for me,
sure,
please?
Sure.
I want to make sure that people understand how districts get from the 5 cents to above that 5 cents. It takes,
An election.
correct, a tax ratification election, which in essence is saying to the taxpayer, we want to increase your taxes. Correct?
Correct.
And so if you take a look, you've got Alamo Heights, 4 years ago, I think, did a TRE. I think it was there. And these other folks did. So you can see that 5 cents compared to some of these other folks, where they're at. I know oftentimes people talk about Comal, but look at their 12 cents. We're hovering around that 5. Okay, thanks, Susie.
Yeah. So on the other side of that coin is that's ongoing revenue, right? So, but sometimes you'll hear people talk about how much districts have in fund balance, and it's something we talk about every year. So when we get to the general fund, we'll talk about it quite a bit, because you absolutely have to have a healthy fund balance in order to make payroll in those months where you're not receiving revenue, and a multitude of other reasons that we cover. But when it comes to fund balance as a percentage of total expenditures, this is something that I can pull for districts all across the state. And the ones in our areas, we definitely have some districts that have saved a lot of money. Now, when we received ESSER funds, we were, cautioned very much so to bank some of that, meaning put as much into fund balance as you can, just because you didn't know what kind of outcomes your students were going to have and what kind of needs beyond that ESSER funding were going to be required. And so most districts have done something similar, so you've seen some of these grow, but you can also see that there are definitely some districts around us with quite a significantly large fund balance. All right, on to my favorite topic of every year. So the School Nutrition Services Fund is a separate fund, and you adopt their budget separately. Let's look at their forecast and a preliminary budget. Again, we have to divide up our topics every year, and so they are kind enough to go first, but bear in mind that a compensation plan and changes to health insurance could change these numbers, so that they may change as we get to budget adoption. But our forecast for 22-23 is roughly 40 million in revenue, most of that coming from federal reimbursements, 75% of the total revenue. For 23-24, we're projecting 34.6 million in revenue, and about 70% of the total coming from federal. So this is a decrease of about 5.4 million. This decline is partially because we want to add community eligibility program sites. This program allows us to feed all children at the campus for free, no matter whether they qualify to eat for free or not. And so as you roll that out to campuses that do not have as high of a free and reduced percentage, then you start to eat into your revenue some. But it's a great trade-off in the sense that now you have kids eating for free. Right now, well, next year, this will move the total to 47 from 38. And we're also seeing part of this decline is a decrease in reimbursement rate because there was a Keep Kids Fed Act during the pandemic that will be going away. So the campuses to be added in 2024 include MacArthur, Madison, Driscoll, Harris, Coker, Northwood, Redlands, Steuben Ranch, and Wetmore. So now the total will be 47. Very exciting news for kids at those campuses. Meal prices stay the same except for the adult prices, just moving up. And thinking about what I paid for lunch today, I'm like, I think I made a poor decision. So these are great prices for really nutritious meals. We are required to monitor these prices, and so when the feds raise their reimbursement rate, sometimes it triggers us having to raise our meal prices too. And so they've got restrictions on the differential between their reimbursement rate and what you charge. So sometimes we have to raise our rates as we go forward based off those requirements. They don't want to subsidize people who have to pay. So anyway, slight increase there, but overall, very stable. Expenditure-wise, we're looking at growing expenditures from 38.3 million to 44.3, an increase of about 6 million. You can see labor and food supplies are the two big pieces of our school nutrition budget, with labor, salaries and benefits being roughly half the budget. And the food and supplies, the bulk of that's food cost, running high 30s to 40%. You can also see here an increase in capital expenditures, and this is a planned spend down, because you'll see when we get to the fund balance slide that they actually need to spend some money. The increases in these expenditures, I'm sure you all feel it when you go to HEB. Your inflation for food costs has been, it hits us too, and we buy in bulk, and we get good discounts, but we still will see it too, and it'll hit our budget. Those additional CEP sites, it's great in feeding them. We'll also see them eat more, because more kids will participate and eat there since it's free. So that'll drive food costs up too, because now we have more kids eating there. So it's good. Our increased staffing numbers and incentive work. So this is us hoping to have fewer vacancies next year, and increasing our capital projects to spend down fund balance, because when you look at fund balance for school nutrition, they're not allowed to hang out over 3 months, and so they have to purposely spend that down. So this is actually what we need them to do. And if it went on too long, then they would stop giving us money until we got there. So it's better for us to plan how to get there than to have them tell us. So you have to file a plan with the Texas Department of Agriculture when it happens. So it's all good. This program is efficient in the sense that we have a warehouse that allows us to purchase and store and buy in bulk. And so we have seen a lot of districts struggle with their school nutrition programs. A lot of times their general fund is having to kick in. We're able to charge them for indirect costs. You know, they receive services from human resources and payroll, and so the general fund actually is able to charge school nutrition for those services and get reimbursed for them, whereas other districts are having to do the opposite. They're having to funnel general fund money into their school nutrition program. So we're very fortunate to have the structure and the facilities that we have. All right, so key takeaways from tonight and this portion of our budget discussion. That first one's huge. We have still a lot to unpack from the legislature. So, and we may not have anything to unpack by the time it's over. So again, like I said before, we may be adopting a budget based off of current law and then waiting to see what happens in a special session. We may adopt a budget on current law because nothing passes and there is no special session. Or something will pass over the weekend and we'll be cranking it out and adding it into the, we'll see what happens. Always remember that increased property values do not translate to increased revenue, that the limitation of 2.5% on our collections requires us to compress the tax rate. And some great news is that our attendance has improved. We're not back to where we were before, but it's looking better. And school nutrition has exciting news to increase their CEP sites, and more kids will get to eat for free. So, now questions.
On this Eat to Free program, I love it, by the way. Do you think that it might help us with attendance where the kids leave campus and don't come back after lunch? Could that be a helpful thing, perhaps? Well, you know, for example, kids skip out at lunch and they don't come back. Mm-hmm. And if they eat for free at the campus, will that encourage them to stay? And maybe would help that a little bit?
It might.
It's not going to hurt. So.
Feed them, they will come.
So I have a question. Thank you so much every year for this thorough presentation. I know we get a lot of the same information, but it's a good refresher. So on your, I think it's your revenue slide.
Okay.
That's right after school nutrition. Let's see, where is it? Yes, I think that's it. So I just want to make sure, and I'm sorry my ear gets clogged. I just want to make sure I understand the, I guess, dynamics of the changes where you have the 2022-23 forecast at $40 million, mm-hmm. and then the preliminary budget at $34.6 million. And that budget went down because, or decreased because?
Some of it is because, and let's flip to this slide. So during COVID, the feds were giving us a higher reimbursement rate. It was to help these school nutrition funds, and Ms. Glosson's here. If I stumble, if you'll jump up and save me. So it was the Keep Kids Fed Act, and so they were giving us higher reimbursements to help the school nutrition programs keep feeding kids. And so that is expiring, and now those rates will decline.
So that's basically the difference.
It's part of the difference. And then moving more campuses onto CEP means we will lose the charges from some students, and the rates will be different. And so we'll receive a little less revenue as we have more campuses on the CEP program.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I just had one about our future session on Monday, the 5th. We're going to be talking about campus staffing. Will that have, will we be getting a report on the family specialist and because we've received quite a few emails and things about those?
They're part of campus staffing, so yes, we'll talk about it.
Okay. If not, if that wasn't in it, I'd really like to get some information on
It's
the
in there.
ups and downs of that.
No,
so.
it's in there. It'll be part, as
It
Ms.
is. Okay.
Lackhorn said, it'll be part of campus staffing.
Great.
And
Okay.
that explanation.
All right, thank you.
Anything else?
I did have a question, on the nutrition general fund, is part of the summer feeding program a way to help pay that down, or is that a completely separate?
It's a completely separate fund.
Okay, okay. And then for the CEP campuses, remind me, what is the threshold? Is there a threshold for, or do we just request that we want to expand it to those campuses? Or is there a threshold or some metric that we have to use to justify?
Ms. Glosson's here to speak to that.
So in order for a campus to be eligible to do CEP, they have to have at least 30% of their students on some type of federal aid program, such as SNAP, Medicaid, or considered homeless, foster child. So they do have a threshold, so we're not able to add any campus that we wish.
Right, right. Okay, that's what I was wondering, what that percent number was. I assumed it was a percent. I guess it's actually lower than I thought it might be, which.
Right, and that's where
fine,
the revenue decrease comes in. So
Yeah.
as we are wanting to expand the services, we're taking on less revenue
Right.
in reimbursement,
Yeah.
but we feel like the benefit outweighs the
Oh,
loss
for
of
sure.
revenue.
Yeah, definitely.
And
So to-
Ms. Glosson, correct me if I'm wrong, but we started with the campuses that had that highest
Yes.
percentage
Correct.
of, it's called direct
Direct
certification
certification.
of students. And so we're working our way down to those lower percentages, but still eligible.
So to piggyback on that, do we still have campuses that are eligible that we have not added, or have we added all that are eligible at
So
this
at
point?
this point, we're adding all that are eligible, but every year we get new data, and so
change.
that's where we've been able to grow
Okay.
each year.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess this presentation gives me my opportunity, my yearly reminder to reach out to your senators and representatives to voice your concerns, your thoughts, your ideas. Go back to your organizations. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Independent. If you're passionate about this, go out and remind them of those things. Push back on whatever narratives that you know are not correct, and make sure that they understand, and hope that we don't get thrown into a basketball game holding a tennis racket, which is sort of what's happening right now. Nothing against tennis. I know people, I don't play it, but just the unfair, oh yeah, kickball with a tennis racket. So anyway, thank you, Ms. Caldwell and others who are keeping track of all the legislation and keeping us up to date, because it's fun times. So thank
And
you,
I love
everybody,
it
for-
because Susie just has a smile on her face
Yes.
and just is so positive and,
Not during the day.
is this just for us?
And not when she's at the dentist.
Well, thank you. Thank you for
worries
your
me. I'm
smiling
sorry for-
face and when you're presenting information that may or may not require a smile.
I'm just crying on the inside. Okay.
Anything else all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate a great presentation. Item B, Balanced District Scorecard Priority 4.
Yes,
Is that-
Madam President. I call on Susie Lackhorn to discuss this balanced district scorecard. We bring you tonight stewardship.
Keep the smile.
I'm good. So, this is just a little snapshot. I don't expect you to read it, but we're talking about stewardship, the fourth priority. We plan and manage funds and resources responsibly. Our first 4.1 objective is that our district will systematically identify, prioritize facility needs, usage, and efficiency. Okay. So, one of our key actions for analyzing the efficient use of our facilities is to prepare and review a campus utilization capacity report. And the staff that had historically worked on this, they had left the district, and so we have new staff working on it. So I had the fun role of working with them to learn about how we calculate capacity. And there are two key components. One is how many kids can your cafeteria serve? And the other is how much classroom space do you have? And so when you're an accountant in the office all day, you don't necessarily think about what it takes to be able to feed all the kids in the day. And so there's a formula, a standard, an industry standard about how much feet each student would need in the cafeteria. And then the goal is also to serve all students within 4 lunch periods. And so the capacity report is calculated using how many kids can the cafeteria feed and how much classroom space is available. And you take the lower of the two, because obviously I don't think there's a building that those two numbers match, right? Because everybody's different. And we have campuses built decades ago, and then campuses that are relatively newer, and then a lot of campuses in between those two that are a hodgepodge, that have new pieces combined with older pieces. And so given the age of our district and the size of our district, we really have a wide variety of buildings and space available. So when we went through this process, and again, I'll just a little disclaimer, as we continue to grow in studying capacity, some of these numbers may change as we learn more and maybe develop new ideas to incorporate. So just bear in mind that this will be a continuous process and a learning experience as we continue through it. But we did find that we have several campuses that are below 50% utilization. We have, this chart here shows you that campuses, we have 6 high schools, 2 middle schools, and 7 elementaries that are over 75% capacity. And then we have a lot of elementaries, 10 middle schools and 1 high school in that 50 to 75% range. And then we have 2 middle schools and 7 elementaries that are sitting at below 50% capacity. Just for the record, Legacy and ISA are combined because they're on the same location. So for capacity analysis, they're combined together here.
So can I ask a question?
Please.
On the below 50%, is it significantly below 50%? Is it closer to, I'm just curious if we have some that
Yes.
are maybe at like 25% capacity?
We have one at 29%.
One at 20, is it a middle or high, elementary? So we have one elementary at 29%? Okay.
And then one at 35%, and then the rest are in the 40s.
Are we going to get the numbers on what it's costing us in order to keep the lower schools open? You know, the one that 29%? Are we going to get those
Villarreal,
numbers?
this is why we're bringing you Priority 4 update this evening. Is we're diving into this in a deep way to bring you back some discussions around these numbers. So tonight is a cursory view and to kind of prime the pump for later discussions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But we'll have the opportunity maybe to repurpose things. And
Yeah, we'll have some. We're digging into this. The first piece that when we looked at this, I asked Ms. Lackhorn to do is to make sure that how we calculated capacity was still accurate today, because that hadn't been touched in a very long time. So what we're doing basically is looking back and saying, okay, the way we always did things, is it still relevant today? Do we need to make changes? and then starting to look as what are we going to do with some of these, and what are their plans? Do we want to continue to keep them? Do we want to do something different with them? I fashion it kind of like what we did with KSAT and ETA. We rebranded them, and now they're into CETA, and we've seen a pretty significant piece to that. So those are those kind of things. What we wanted to do tonight, for the sake of the scorecard, right, is to kind of give you a glimpse as to where we're at in the process. I'm not ready to bring a recommendation to you tonight, but you all need to see that, hey, there's some campuses that are pretty low.
So to follow up on that, the two middle schools, do you have percentages of where they are?
They're both in the 40s.
Okay, thank you.
And then to follow up on that follow-up. No, is there in establishing these percentage or these numbers of cafeteria space club, do they recommend, is there like an efficient, hey, this percentage is the percentage that makes it, you're using your space well, you're using, okay. I'm just curious if there was a benchmark that you want to target.
No, but Ms. Villarreal, so I'm going to follow up to your question. The reason that we don't is, look, there are lots of things you can do with these. So you got options. You can just shutter them. You can repurpose them. You can reboundary. You can create a different program to put it there. I mean, there's a lot of different options out there. Those are the things that we're working through as to what makes sense. And what I'd like to do is, at a later date, right, is to engage you all in let's talk about these campuses. What do we want to do? What does our community value, and what do you all want? And we got to look at that stewardship. And I think you all were very wise when you said it's efficient and effective, right? And then, is this an opportunity to combine campuses? I don't know, maybe. And what are the benefits of that? So we've had some cursory discussions, but as Ms. Lackhorn explained, we're doing a lot of research right now. We're in the fact-finding phase to really wrap our arms around, when we walk into this campus, let's take a real look at it. And is this being reported the right way? Has it been Frankensteined over the years because there's been a different program there and some things got changed, and well, that actually would take a little bit. Look, when we went out to pre-K to recognize them, the grandparent and the mother there said, you really need another pre-K academy. You should be doing another one of these. So there's all sorts of opportunities, right? The question just becomes, we've got to get our hands wrapped around what we have, and then engage you all in the discussion of here's some options that are available to you as a board.
Is there any way that we could reach out to our communities and find out about maybe programs that our community members are interested in and factor that in?
Yeah. Ms. Caldwell, did you hear that question? That's what I've been asking, actually. As I've been going around, I've said, I need your help. Tell me a program that we don't have currently that we're missing, or something that we should be expanding. So I've given that presentation, I don't know, probably good 5 times, asking that very question. Because as we, went into cyber, and look, y'all were geniuses that you let us do that, because that's a program that's now world renowned, right? Because we got into something. We're going into CETA that we're super excited about, and I think we've got a very different trajectory than some other school districts. I'll just be honest with you, we're talking about a third one. Mr. Jarrett is quietly working on that. And so we actually garnered some seed money in order to pay for this adventure that we're on, rather than me just saying, figure this out, Mr. Jarrett, with nothing. So these are talks that we've got going on. And yes, absolutely reaching out to the community is a key piece to it, Ms. Villarreal, because is this something that, we have a program that a lot of people want and we just don't have the capacity, and we should look at another one, i.e. maybe a pre-K. Or, gosh, we would really love a magnet focused on whatever, football, right? Okay, so do we want to do something like that? Those are the things that we're working through right now. Okay?
Thank
So
you.
if you have some folks that would like to provide input, and we're working right now on creating a survey to really ask our teachers about where they would like voice next year into things. As soon as that gets going, our next piece, in fact, we just talked about it again this morning, executive staff, is then to look toward our community and our parents on where that voice is going to come in. All tied into the Balanced District Scorecard. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, 4.1B, key action, is for us to research and evaluate effective district work order systems. And we are currently reviewing an existing system that's being used for another purpose and 3 external work order vendors. And so right now, operations is working through comparing those vendors. They've already gone through, defined what requirements we have. Now we'll compare our vendors. Once that's done, we'll select one, go through the implementation process, and then it'll be a process of evaluating data and learning the lessons and implementing improvements from that.
So I'm going to jump in on there.
Please.
So some of you have heard me talk about the need for this type of system for some time. There's a couple of goals in a program that we're looking for. One is better communication from the folks that are doing the fixing back to the campuses and where things are. So, hey, I've been out there. I looked at your HVAC. Yep, the supply chain still isn't great, and we've got the part ordered, but it's not going to be in for 3 days. So sometimes that doesn't get conveyed then to the person who put the work order in. All they know is, well, somebody showed up and it's still hot, right? So to making sure that there's some great two-way conversation. The other piece is to start really tracking what's the average repair time that it's taking for us to fix an HVAC piece. And so our hope in there is then, and as you'll hear in the Smart Tag system, is how it actually helped us get more efficient, and we end up saving money over time by tracking things in a much more detailed manner, so that we really have a firm understanding of what's going on out there. Because again, we're a large district, and there's a lot of moving pieces. And there are some pieces, some programs out there. I know Dr. Mitchell, when I got him, has been working on this pretty extensively, along with maintenance and operations. So.
4.1C, key action is to develop a district-wide facility and equipment replacement schedule. So in this replacement schedule world, we've been slowly adding pieces here and there. And so a lot of things over the last, well, actually since Dr. Micah became superintendent, we've added certain methodologies and ways to build replacement schedules. And now it's time to really take a look district-wide at some of those bigger pieces. So right now, we've recently defined categories and the scope to do a much bigger, broader review. And now we are assessing of those pieces, which piece should be done internally and which pieces should we hire an expert to come in and help us review the where those facilities stand and what is needed to maintain them. So at the moment, we've got, or we will have back out again because we just expired and opened a new bid for an RFP for a vendor to come in and help us with the facility assessment. So right now, we're looking for a vendor to help us with the really big pieces, to analyze our facilities, tell us how the HVAC systems are, and build the schedule of when they need to be replaced. And then we can take everything, build out the full schedule for all these pieces, schedule them, define funding sources for all of them, and then build a continuous reevaluation process. So, but right now we're looking for those pieces of finding the experts to help us evaluate.
So for those of you who've been around a while, you've heard me talk about the white fleet. You've heard me talk about HVAC. You've heard me talk about parking lots. All of those things is what we're trying to get our hands wrapped around so that there aren't surprises moving forward. Like, we're going to know that whatever, whether it be a car, a roof, a piece of HVAC equipment, we know that's going to be up for replacement in 10 years so that we can start then planning ahead for that 10-year piece. The example I gave as we talked about this is I replaced my air conditioning units 4 years ago. I know in 6 more years I'm going to have to start thinking about a replacement, right? So we're building up. My wife and I start planning for that rather than getting there and going, oh gosh, we need an air conditioner. Now what do we do? You know, where's the money? What we're trying to do is make sure, or cafeteria tables or desks or chairs, all of those things is to build in a plan. I call it a tier model is what I refer to it as. Tier 1, if you don't fix this now, you're going to have a major problem. You know, tier 2 is these would be good if you fix them now. Tier 3 is I can wait a little while. And tier 4 is, hey, you got some time, right? To really be able to plan systemically year after year after year so that we know what's coming, so that we know how to budget for it.
Objective 4.2, our district will systematically evaluate programs, practices, and procedures for effectiveness and efficiency. One of the things that we, right off the bat, once you developed the Balanced District Scorecard, is to go ahead and in our resource request process is to go in and tie everything to the scorecard. So we have multiple ways you can request resources here in the district, and so every year you hear us talk about additional allocation requests, and we show them to you. Well, now that process, it is when they're filling out the request, they have to tell us how that request ties to the district scorecard, and what kind of outcome measurement will we be looking at to evaluate whether or not it was successful or not. Now, bear in mind, when your additional allocation request is because electricity prices have gone up, you're not going to have a great outcome measurement other than the lights are still on because we paid the bill. But it definitely would be something you could tie to the district scorecard because of student safety or those kinds of things. And so especially this is valuable really for those unique requests that aren't tied to inflation or something like that. And we have 2 other methods for people to ask for different things. And we're not just talking about money, we're talking about staff, we're talking about supplies and different things. And so our resource requests, that's when school starts and principals are looking at their enrolled students and their staffing, and they're like, hey, I got way more 4th graders than I thought. I need another 4th grade teacher. And so this process is actually very old. It's, I think it's been the same since I've been here, and that's been quite some time. So we're going to take our time with this process and really look at how we can improve it. And as we do it, we will be tying those requests to the scorecard and getting those outcome measurements that we need.
I love this, tying it to the scorecard. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's nice when you're the person that always says no, and then now I can say, does it tie to the scorecard?
Right.
No. Oh, then no.
Yeah.
You know, and it
But
works out
look,
really well.
it's what we talked about with the scorecard, y'all. It's keeping us hyper-focused on what you as a board expect and what our community has said. So it's not about being a bad guy or a good guy. It's simply about, is this important? Mm-hmm. It's right here. Okay, then we have an obligation to figure out how to fund it. You want something that doesn't make any sense because it's not tied to the scorecard, or I know you're passionate about it and it's really cool, but it doesn't really link to what we're currently focused on, so we're just going to say no. I think Mr. Jared, I know, uses this all the time. He always tells me, I really like it because I can get to say no a lot. Because in the end, it's because he's grounding it in the balanced scorecard. it's really looking, and I think what it's doing is well, I don't think, I know, it's keeping us focused on the right things, and we're not straying off on a tangent or on a whim.
As long as we ended, I have a finance person at work, when you ask, do we have any money in that budget? She's like,
Absolutely.
no, but have a nice day. So,
Well-
just end it with, have a nice day.
Yeah. But I think you all were very wise when you incorporated in, and Susie go back one slide. It's the effectiveness and efficiency. So it's not just about that super efficient, but are we getting the effectiveness of what we expected from it? So it's, again, bringing the balance to those both pieces, right? So yes, as we were reviewing this, I was like, that's genius, because that's what we need to be doing.
Yeah, that's why we have that outcome measurement included in there, is because you need to be able to evaluate whether or not it was effective. And sometimes it's not. And then that's when you need to say, okay, it's time to take those resources and allocate them to something that's more aligned or has more appropriate outcomes.
And it helps us determine what's really needed, because if you remember earlier in the slides, we lost $13 million between 21 and 22 and 22, 23, and 23, 24 doesn't look like it's going to give us any more revenue. So becoming more efficient and effective, it's really helpful.
All right, so another key action is to improve the accuracy of data management systems to inform and develop appropriate departmental budgets. And that's a lot of words. But what we're trying to do is take data to help either make things more efficient, more effective, and to drive decision-making. And a great example is our smart tag system. If you remember, I don't remember how long ago it was, that transportation came and presented about this smart tag system. 21. Okay, 21. Time is passing me by. But this system allows us to identify bus usage, and through the data that it provided, transportation was able to eliminate 12 a.m. normal routes, 7 p.m. routes, and 12 other routes, some of their special routes, using this data. And so that's 12 people that didn't have to be driving in the morning, and 7 people who didn't have to be driving in the afternoon. Because right now, with their shortage of drivers, a lot of the office staff is going out and driving, and then they're coming back and doing all their office work. So this is a great help. And as we continue to gather that data, it really will help drive good decision making.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that we began this process really looking at ways to help our parents and our bus drivers, right, about safety of where students go when they drop off. But then as Bill and his folks started digging into this, they're like, hey, look at this. We can actually start to become more efficient in our routing system. And so when you see that loss of revenue, here it is, but it's because we're becoming more efficient, because the data that's being gathered and utilized, and by the data, I'm just saying the number of kids that rode that bus that morning versus this morning versus that morning and so forth, right? That's all the data we're getting. Is just we have now a true number, right, of ridership. And so that's what they're using to drive some of those decisions. And I can remember when Bill was hired as the director, Jack described him as a routing savant. And so he's very gifted at it. And so, kudos to them for figuring out how to use the data to help with a lot of different things. And I think we start out with one thing, but hey, here's a great product. So I think our ROI on that one has been extremely beneficial.
Another data-related project is tying our master schedules in the student system over to which teaching positions our teachers are in. This will, right now, we have to have the principals review their list and say, oh, I moved this person from 3rd grade to 4th grade, or this person's no longer teaching social studies, they now teach science. And so it's a lot of manual work, both on the principal side and the HR department side. And so what we're trying to do is build the student system with the schedules and then what the teachers are teaching to the HR system so that we can save the principal's time and HR staff's time. And then it'll also help us easily identify those teachers that are teaching things that meet those spending requirements for those allotments in Tier 1 we talked about earlier. So that makes everybody's life easier, and the data's doing the work for us instead of, asking the principals. And we ask at the beginning of the year, and they have so much going on for them to sit through, and then changes come. It will be such a better process to let us read the system, pull the data, and make that connection. So it's right now we're still in the testing phase of this. So we've built the basic outline between the two systems, but we're still validating the data because there's a lot of classes, there are a lot of positions. It's going to take us a little while to fine tune it and feel that it's accurate.
Are there any systems that we've currently put into place that will help our teachers with a lot of the busy work that they're having to do to comply? That's kind of something, for example, lesson plans. If you already know that there's going to be a lesson plan, can't we pre-generate stuff like that so that our teachers don't have to, have to think about that and create their own? If we know that there's a certain outcome, and wouldn't that be a better, budget of their time and things like this, and take some of the irritation away? Maybe.
I can't speak.
So
Yeah.
Mr. Jarrett and I have had this very discussion. And so, Ms. Villarreal, what we're working on is a way, when I talked about voice, this is what I mean by, is that something that our teachers feel that needs to be tackled so that we can sit at a table with them, because we need to look across the system as a whole. And so things that Mr. Jarrett and I have talked about, thinking that this would relieve something ends up, that's not what they want. And so I don't want to sit up here and think that I know. I'd rather ask them to be a participant in that. And so that's when I talked about figuring out their voice. That's what we're talking about, is that very component. And that, where I have found the best to capture their voice, because I have visited, along with Mr. Jarrett, not a lot, but several teachers in the district. And what they've told me is, don't email it to me. Don't email. I'm not going to do it. What I have found, though, where I get a lot of success in my response rate is at convocation. And I put up a QR code, and they do it, and we're able to capture. I think the last 2 years I've gotten about somewhere between 80 and 90% response rate, which is great, which means I've captured enough, truly across the system. And then our job is to break it down into what is it that, where is it now? Let's get to work on it, and sit there and help us sort through it. Because what we hypothesize is elementary teachers, high school teachers are going to have some different pieces. And so we have to sort through that. And making sure that we're not trying to say that all teachers are the same. They're not. And so we have to look through, because a teacher that's teaching special education is going to have slightly different input than a teacher that's teaching kindergarten. And they might not. But we've got to make sure that we hear the gamut across it.
So has the process already started? Do we have any ideas or anything like that?
So we're working on that instrument right now to roll out in August when we do convocation. So at that point, then we will have what we need to pursue voice with. And then I would hope that by September we'll be starting that process to work on. Because some of it, and I will just tell you, Ms. Villarreal, with some of the pieces that we've talked to, things that come up are like ARD paperwork. That's a federal law. I can't get rid of it. But when we can get down to what are the things that are in our locus of control, that's what we're trying to get to. That's it. So expect that in very early of next school year. And once I get the data, I always bring it back to y'all and say, here's what they say. And then we can take a look at it, and here's the plan in which to address it.
Okay, thank you.
I really love that because I think, as you mentioned, you get a lot of participation because they're right there. People are right there. Okay,
Exactly.
you don't have to try to create some other mechanism to capture what maybe 5-10%.
Right.
You know,
Well-
everybody has a smartphone. Well, not my mother-in-law.
Well, and Miss Williams, look, if
She won't be a
you know,
cupcake.
as you all heard tonight from our internal auditor, right? She spent 6 weeks trying to get a response rate. What we know is right at that beginning, we get a good response, and then we're able to act on it. And that's why, as you remember, even from my own videos, you'll hear us referencing that survey and what they felt was important. Well, now it will be, here's where you want to have a voice and what you want to work on. But again, you have to sit with us and help us sort through it. We can't do it on our own.
All right, 4.3, the budget will be developed in a clear and concise manner aligned with strategic priorities and communicated to staff and stakeholders. So I was doing great, and then I saw that word concise. I was like, oh, I think I fell down on concise at all times here. But one of the things we're doing budget development wise is really taking a long look at how our department budgets are allocated. Currently, our campuses, they've been formula-based for a long time. It's their number of students times their rate, and then their number of free and reduced students times another rate, you know. And so we take each of those, kind of like the tier one, we take some of those instructional settings and give them a little extra money for those students. And so that's been a calculation, and we actually did that process through our transformation process years ago. So that was one of the key things that we did back then. And but departments have always kind of been, you get the same thing each year unless something changes. And it's been fine in the sense that we've reduced budgets as they've needed to be reduced, and they've increased. But one thing, now that we have a scorecard, is that we want to make sure that what those departments are spending their budget on actually ties into the scorecard. So we're going department by department. We started with 4, 1 for each chief, and we're going to look at the baseline for their budget and look at what they're spending on, review that it still ties to the district scorecard, and then we'll start developing, you know, we're really in that kind of evaluation phase right now, trying to get our hands wrapped around this project. How do we fund certain things, like if you're one of the departments over one of the spending allotments, that facility and equipment replacement schedule will then, which pieces from that will go into department budgets, what trainings are required, how much staff do you have, how much staff do you need? So all those questions will come into play as we look at each of these departments. And then once we feel like we've mapped out the process, each year have the chiefs review to make sure we're staying in line with the scorecard, and then it'll make things easier as we evaluate requests and everything. And so it's not a zero-based budget. It's some sort of hybrid, I think, that we're developing here that has no real name yet. But we're really just trying to take those department budgets, align them to the scorecard, and develop a methodology to continue their budgets year to year. Anyway, so it's quite, like I said, we've got a good 30 departments throughout the district. Some of them have very large budgets, some of them are pretty tiny. We've looked at 4 already. One, we've already decided they're just not spending all the money that they get. And so we've been giving them a base budget not every year, but like for a while they've been getting a base budget and they don't need all of it. So we'll not necessarily save any money, but we'll save some budget because they don't have the need that they had back when they originally established that level of funding. And so it's going to be a fun process for those of us who like to look at a lot of numbers. And then everybody else is going to be miserable. But we'll get through it and ultimately get things aligned real tightly between the departments and the scorecard. That's the goal. All right, so another piece is for campuses and their budgets is when we get a new campus budget manager, principal, we go in and we train them and we hand them a list of things. Hey, these are the things you're expected to pay for. And then we always have a handful of things that end up like, oh, should I really be paying for that? Should somebody else be paying for that? How do I replace this? What comes, these unique things that don't come up every single year. So we want to take the replacement schedule that we develop, and some of those things are going to be assigned to those campus budgets. And then not only will we be able to tell them, these are the things you're expected to pay for, but when a brand new principal walks in the door, I can say, here's where you're at. These are the things that you need to replace out of next year's budget. Or these are the things at your campus that'll be replaced out of this other funding source. And so it'll really help give principals guidance on how to manage their funds. All right, and finally, expand our financial transparency website to include budget development items. So we have the video from the Finance Town Hall that we did back at the end of April. As we do these budget study presentations, we'll be adding the presentation link on our financial transparency website to make it easy for people to find. Right now, we're working on some little short videos that explain some school finance concepts. The script, it's a draft of a video about the cup is complete, and so we'll be making a little video about the cup. And Jason's gonna film me actually pouring the stuff. So, yeah, and then we'll be able to reuse that, send it out periodically to help explain that concept. And then we have the 3 other rough ideas for concepts, and then hopefully once we've developed the budget, we can do a nice summary of the annual budget and an infographic to kind of lay out like, here's what's happening with compensation, here's what's happening with revenue, those kinds of things to help communicate to our end users and stakeholders about the budget. This past year, just in keeping with the overall concept of the scorecard, I think I have done a traveling tour, more so than ever before. So I've been to a lot of different places, DEIC. We always do Leadership Northeast, but we've kind of taken that same kind of concept and pushed it out to a lot more places because not everybody is in Leadership Northeast. And so we went to DEIC this year. Lately, I've been going to, Dan and I have been going to different departments. And so transportation invited us out the other day, and we really just walked through those same concepts that we talked about with the cup and all those things. And we made it out to the Madison cluster, and I had listed several more, and now I don't remember what they all are, but it's been great. The other day I actually got to help somebody when we were talking about property taxes with their over 65 exemption. When I was talking about those exemptions, he was like, can I ask? And I was like, sent the link to the form, and I felt like, man, I helped somebody today. I saved somebody some money today. That was a great feeling. So we're definitely hitting the road and trying to share the story about school finance and how it works. So in addition to building these things on the website, we're just trying to get out in public.
And trying to get it out to the principals. We volunteer to go out to their staff meetings. We did the cluster meeting, like she said. We're throwing it out. The more people that hear it, the more they might understand the way it works. I mean, funding is so different when you look at it, state funding and the way the mechanisms all work together. I think if people would get a working knowledge of it, they might better understand, you know, some of the limitations we have as far as revenue and our expenses. So, yeah, we're throwing it out more, so we're trying to communicate that to be able to go out and do more of these one-off presentations.
How much time did you spend in Austin? Because maybe they need a lesson.
You know, that's interesting you bring it up, because when Ms. Caldwell and I were there, a couple legislators actually said, we need more people in Austin that understand school budgeting.
That understand any budgeting.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, keep going. Oh. Any questions for, it was another great presentation. I love tying all this into, I mean, it really, I think it'll help inform us and make some good decisions. So, anybody else? All right. Item 10, adjournment, and the time is 8:18. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Susie.
Yes, thank you, Susie.
Tell the Dennis to call us.